Good afternoon and welcome to News 24. We are bringing you analysis from our studio in Cape Town in anticipation of the meeting of the ANC's top leadership this afternoon to decide the fate of President Jacob Zuma. Joining me today here is Phephelaphi Dube, Director at the Centre for Constitutional Rights, and Adriaan Basson, Editor of News 24. Colleagues, big day for South Africa potentially if President Zuma is recalled later today. There's been a lot of speculation and a lot of to and fro from the ANC, with ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa asking for time and patience while he negotiates this transition, as they call it. But it all could come down to the NEC meeting today, Adriaan.
Alet, yes, I think it's been very tiresome for all of us. I think we all feel exhausted. Can't this thing just happen now? We need some clarity. We need to move on as a country. And I think that's what Cyril Ramaphosa did so well yesterday during his speech in Cape Town when he addressed the Mandela centenary function to say, look, he knows the country has to move on. It's not only about the ANC, it's about the country. And the country needs stability and clarity. So hopefully, finally today, the ANC will provide that leadership. I think, looking back, one could possibly judge Ramaphosa maybe a bit harshly about the deal he tried to make with Zuma. We all know who Jacob Zuma is by now. We know that he's not a man you can trust. We know that he always will negotiate for his own best interest and not for the country. So maybe one can be critical of the fact that Ramaphosa first didn't pull the trigger when he had the chance last week, Wednesday, when he cancelled the NEC meeting in Cape Town. On the other hand, I am a bit more lenient. I do understand that Ramaphosa wanted not to be seen as an aggressor in this exit of Zuma, that he wanted Zuma to kind of leave on his own volition to decide that I'm going gracefully. He wanted to make that option available to him. So today I expect when Ramaphosa speaks at the NEC, he will say to them, comrades, I tried my best. I tried to give him all the options and he just didn't want to leave.
Phephelaphi, the ANC will then probably or could then recall President Zuma at today's NEC meeting, but does this necessarily mean the end of President Zuma?
Interesting point that, because I think here it's really about, the straddling that fine line between the political process and the legal process. So politically, the ANC may be well within its rights to recall the president, but unless and until the president resigns and that resignation rises to a vacancy in the president's office, it's really of no legal force. But of course, it's also important to note that the Constitution does envisage a situation where a president has been recalled by a party and refuses to tender that resignation. In that instance, it's quite possible for the party to then either impeach him or institute a motion of no confidence. But of course, as we all know right now, we don't have a procedure to go through with an impeachment, which means that the only alternative would be for the ANC's parliamentary caucus to then go ahead and vote with the EFF on the 22nd of February in the motion of no confidence. But of course, there are quite very interesting results that would come out of that if the motion of no confidence was to carry. Namely, the fact that the motion doesn't not only remove the president, but it also removes the deputy president, any deputy ministers, as well as all of the members of cabinet. And in that instance, it means that the deputy president would simply step down from his position and go back to being an ordinary backbencher. And it obviously depends on the members of parliament to decide whether or not to vote him into office to finish off President Zuma's term. And in all of that, the Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, would be our acting de facto president.
So Adriaan, obviously not a situation that the ANC wants, having this to go to Parliament. Do you think Ramaphosa has the support in the NEC today to make a decision to recall President Zuma?
Look, I think, Alet, if you look at how the balance of forces has turned and has swung in the ANC, I think so. I would be very surprised if Ramaphosa doesn't get the recall through the NEC today. Yes, he was elected with a very slim majority at Rensburg in December. But since then, everything that he's done, we've seen that momentum shifting towards Ramaphosa. We saw his intervention at Eskom, basically firing the whole board and appointing a new acting CEO and board chairperson. We saw the state capture criminal action finally starting to happen. So there's been clear signs already that the mood in the country has changed. We've seen an improvement in the economy. The rand has strengthened, the petrol price has come down, and that's a direct result of Ramaphosa's victory. We've also seen staunch Zuma supporters like Fikile Mbalula and Malusi Gigaba, who previously were campaigning very hard for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, now speaking out for Ramaphosa. So I have actually no doubt that if the NEC today debates the recall, that will succeed. The question is, as Phephelaphi put it, how is it going to happen practically? Because as you guys rightly said, Jacob Zuma can refuse to resign. Let's think about that for a moment. Will he refuse to do that? That will almost be like a kamikaze pilot. That will be really destroying what you have left, the benefits you have left. Because as we are learning now, the deal collapsed because Zuma wanted more. He wanted more security. He wanted more money for legal fees, etc. So I think that will be a very risky move by Jacob Zuma, but not something one could put past him. He might want to test the last avenue, which is trying to convince MPs in Parliament not to vote for him being found incompetent, or then a motion of no confidence succeeding against him. Again, I would be surprised if Zuma doesn't resign. It will be very humiliating to have him kicked out by Parliament, specifically on a motion brought by the EFF. But Phephelaphi, I do think it's still possible, and I don't know the technicalities around this, but I still think that the chances are more likely for the ANC to actually decide today to bring their own motion of no confidence in President Zuma in Parliament.
Absolutely, it's quite possible, but in saying that, we're going to be throwing the ball back into the Speaker of the National Assembly's court, and I think perhaps you, from your political analysis background, would probably be better queued up on that, just in terms of knowing which particular faction of the governing party she falls into, because we need to bear in mind that she's simply said in the past that she couldn't schedule a motion of no confidence sooner. So at the moment, the question would come down to, would the Speaker of the National Assembly acquiesce to that kind of request? And of course, that kind of question is better informed if one is perhaps better aware of the internal dynamics within the ANC, and also bearing in mind her position with the ANC. So ultimately, it would come down to her and what she chooses at the end of the day.
So let's just talk about this exit package, the so-called exit package for Zuma. There's been a lot of talk about indemnity or a possible pardon after prosecution, but how much bargaining power does President Zuma actually have in terms of the legal standing he will have after he's removed as president?
Your question again comes down to my earlier point about the fact that there are political processes, but then there are also legal processes. And I think what we're seeing right now is really the suggestion that oftentimes political processes may very well fudge the boundaries of legality. Because bear in mind the fact that, there's been talk of a presidential pardon, but really if one gives the Constitution a good reading, a presidential pardon can only come from the president, and of course President Zuma himself can't be a judge and the jury in his own matter, so he can't grant himself any kind of pardon. So it would then fall upon the acting president, assuming that the acting president is going to be Cyril Ramaphosa. But in terms of the law, one needs to go through a legal process. One needs to be convicted first before a pardon is even considered. Of course, one can then consider an immunity deal with the National Prosecuting Authority, but it's important to bear in mind that the sort of immunity deals that the National Prosecuting Authority has in mind are the sort of immunity deals where you have lesser criminals, for want of a better term, but lesser criminals coming up and giving up incriminating evidence in order for the National Prosecuting Authority to catch the bigger criminal, again, for want of a bigger word. So, of course, in this instance, President Zuma is very much the kingpin. His name comes up again and again in all of these issues of corruption, racketeering, money laundering, not to mention the state of capture report. So it's highly debatable that the National Prosecuting Authority would accept an immunity deal from him because he features prominently in all of this. So I think any deal which the ANC would reach with the president would definitely open itself up to legal challenge.